Days before my move across the country for my dream job, my parents insist I stay because my sibling has a mysterious ailment. A day before my flight, I discovered the ailment was just a ploy to keep me from building a life away from them. So I pack my bags and leave without saying goodbye, and now my parents are mad. So this is the story of how to change continents to get away from the drama of my family. I'm Penny, 29 female. My family, let's just say we're what folks call close, like smotheringly close. My mom Analise, 54 female, and my dad Richard, 57 male, are sweet as can be, and my little brother Edward, 26 male, is the baby of the family. Well, as the oldest, sometimes it feels like I've spent my whole life under a microscope. It's a lot, even though I try to remind myself they mean well. Seriously, I'm 29, not 12, but you wouldn't know it some days. Honestly, I don't even remember when it all started. Remember those first sleepovers at a friend's house? Forget it. My mom would grill my friends' parents like she was the FBI. Allergies, dietary stuff, you name it. I never understood the fuss. I had my meds and emergency numbers. What more could go wrong? High school was worse. While everyone else was thinking about road trips and parties, I was on a strict curfew. Even sleepovers were limited to like once a year, and those were only with a group of girls mom hand-selected. It felt like I was the only one missing out on, teenage life. College was a whole other nightmare. See, I got into this fantastic university a few hours away, way better than the local option. But my parents lost their minds. Mom cried, like actual tears. Dad spent weeks giving me the silent treatment. Of course I could have gone, paid my own tuition, whatever, but that would have torn the family apart. I ended up stuck here in this town, feeling kind of resentful, even though I know I shouldn't. Edward, my younger brother, he got the same treatment, different college, same guilt trip. It's a miracle the poor guy found a girlfriend, let alone got married last year. Now, his wife gets the brunt of their meddling. And guess what? After getting a job, I used to live 10 minutes from my parents. Convenient, sometimes. Suffocating, always. You wouldn't believe the number of surprise drops in I got. Mom even had a spare key. Dad just happened to be in the neighborhood fixing things all the time. I know I should have just moved, but work, my boyfriend, everything's here. It's complicated. It got weirder when I started dating Mike, the guy I'm actually planning a future with. My first serious boyfriend in years. They had to meet his entire extended family within a week. Mom started bringing him homemade lunches. Dad was his new golf buddy. It was mortifying. Thankfully, Mike was a good sport about it. Mike and I didn't last, but the constant interruptions in my life because of my parents continued. After my breakup, my mom would just show up unannounced to quote-unquote support me. That mostly meant bringing over a bucket of ice cream and a stack of cheesy rom-coms. Not my scene, but hey, I appreciated the sentiment. Less appreciated, her relentless campaign to set me up with literally every eligible male she knew. The mailman's nephew, check. The dentist's cousin's son, yup. Some guy from her knitting circle's bingo night. Seriously, Mom. Don't get me wrong. Yes, my parents are caring and I love them. I appreciate that they're always there for me. But with the level of involvement they have, it can get really weird. For instance, last month I had a minor cold. You know, the sniffles, a bit of headache, nothing major. Next thing I know, Mom's at my door, armed with soup, fussy socks, and enough vitamin C to cure an entire elementary school. The following day, Dad turned up, ready to fix my broken thermostat, convinced I was practically freezing to death in my apartment. Sweet in theory, but honestly, a working immune system would have been more helpful. Don't even get me started on my social life, or my non-existent lack thereof. Apparently, now that I'm heartbroken, my parents are worried I'll become this lonely cat lady forever. Every time I mention potentially hanging out with friends, even just for coffee, my mom starts this whole production. It's, are you sure you're ready to put yourself out there? And maybe we could join you, just for a little bit. It's like they've forgotten I can actually function without them. The worst was a couple of weeks ago. I had made a loose plan to meet up with Emily, an old friend from work. Nothing fancy, dinner, drinks, catch up on life. I swear, the moment I told my mom, it was like the parental emergency alarm went off. My phone was bombarded with concerned texts. Dad offered to drive me up just in case. Emily bailed last minute anyway. Thankfully, because somehow I think my parents might have actually tagged along. It's a delicate balance. I don't want to push them away or hurt their feelings, but sometimes I crave a little normalcy. A life or a night out does not require a pre-planned escape strategy, a cold that is just a cold. It was getting exhausting. I thought this would be the perfect time for me to put some space between my parents and I, so I started looking for jobs. It took me a while, with the job market as it is, but Lady Luck finally smiled at me. I got a job opportunity in none other than London. You can imagine I was beyond excited. Off I went, practically skipping home to tell my parents the news. The response, well, it wasn't exactly what I'd hoped for. London? My dad looked like I'd suggested moving to Mars. But why so far? Mom immediately went into full-fledged panic mode. How could you do this to us? Will you really leave the country? Abandon your family? Ouch. I tried. I really did, to explain. Mom, Dad, I'm not doing this to you. It's this amazing opportunity. New city, new job, an adventure. But the tears had already started. Mom was full-on sobbing about how I was leaving her forever. Dad was pulling the whole silent but disappointed routine. And it was heavier than any lecture. The guilt trip was epic. They kept harping on how family comes first and how I could find a job right here in town. I mean, sure, I could become an accountant at the same firm Dad worked at for 30 years. Thrilling. The next few weeks were tense. It felt like I was the world's worst daughter. Mom's sniffles were a constant soundtrack. Dad would give me these long, sad looks that made me want to crawl under a rock. Half of me just wanted to give in, cancel the whole London thing, and bury any dreams of escape. Sometimes, it felt like cutting the apron strings would take more than just buying a plane ticket. But the other half, the part of me starved for a life that was, well, fully mine, that part was defiant. This job was a chance to break the pattern, to finally see what I could do on my own. I kept reminding myself, I love my parents, but I also love myself enough to want something different. It took forever, but slowly they sort of resigned themselves to it. Mom still sighs dramatically when I mention how long the flight is. Dad occasionally makes passive-aggressive comments about needing to learn how to use video calls. However, I still had 2 months before I had to move, and my parents were using every arrow in their quiver to try to get me to stay. Let's just say things got creative. First came the accidental mishaps. Every leaky faucet, wonky Wi-Fi connection, or flickering light bulb became my dad's personal crusade to fix. He'd show up laden with tools, muttering about how he didn't know what I would do without him in London. Okay, Dad, I get it. I may never be a DIY pro, but I can Google how to replace a washer like the best of them. Mom took a more subtle approach, ramping up the home-cooked meals and surprise care packages. Suddenly, my fridge was overflowing with casseroles I hadn't requested. One morning, I woke up to find she'd quote-unquote organized my closet, aka strategically placed old childhood mementos everywhere. Message received, Mom. Then came the parade of helpful suggestions. Dad started sending me Craigslist ads for used cars in London, complete with notes like, might be safer than the tube. Mom, bless her heart, began forwarding articles about the shockingly high cost of living in England. My favorite was titled, Tea and Toast Syndrome is Dangerous. Charming. The social calendar got weird too. They started planning excessive family outings, picnics, museum trips, even a double date to some bingo night. It was sweet, but also a tad suffocating, like they were cramming in a lifetime of bonding in a few weeks, not to mention the constant questions. So have you figured out the whole time zone difference thing? Or did you pack warm socks? I hear it rains a lot there. It was a constant barrage of well-meaning concern, thinly disguising the hope that I'd somehow get cold feet. But then, they stopped. Not the well-meaning nagging or the emotional home repair emergencies. I mean the outright campaign to get me to stay. It was almost a bit unsettling. I half expected to find a hidden camera in my apartment, them secretly hoping to catch me tipping over my suitcase in a moment of doubt. Instead, the mood flipped. We had a family dinner, one surprisingly free of tears or thinly veiled pleas. When I dished out the good news, visa sorted, apartment found, start date confirmed, they actually smiled. Genuine smiles. We're so proud of you, kiddo, Dad said, which was pretty huge coming from him. Don't get me wrong, he's supportive, but in that gruff, silently worried dad kind of way. Mom even got a little teary-eyed but in a wistful, happy way. My little girl, all grown up and taking on the world, she said. It was cheesy, and of course, a tissue had to be involved, but it felt good. Of course, this newfound acceptance came with its own set of instructions. I was to call them every single day. I was to be safe, vaguely defined as not crossing any streets without first sending a live location update. And of course, I was supposed to come back home to visit whenever I could. It was a long list, but somehow less stifling than the guilt trips of the past few weeks. I was honestly a bit suspicious at first. Had they developed a super elaborate reverse psychology plan? Were they secretly counting on me getting so annoyed by their daily calls that I would rush home just for some peace and quiet? Maybe this was all a long con for me to appreciate home more than ever before. But maybe, just maybe, they were finally starting to let go. Maybe they saw how determined I was, how excited, and realized that fighting me was pointless. I started to suspect this move wasn't some grand act of rebellion, but rather the perfectly natural next step. One made a little harder by parents who loved me, maybe a bit too much. However, just 3 days before I was supposed to fly across the ocean, I got a call that sent my perfectly packed suitcase tumbling into a heap of chaos. It was Mom, and her voice was shaky. Not the usual, "Did you pack your vitamins?" shaky, but a whole different level of panic. "Penny, you need to come home right away. It's Edward." My heart dropped. Edward, my goofy, invincible little brother. What could be wrong? I grilled them. Accident? Injury? But they were frustratingly vague. "Just come home, please," was all Mom could manage through her tears. 10 minutes later, bursting through the door of my parents' house, I was met with a scene far removed from the farewell party I'd imagined. Mom was pacing, her hands twisting a dish towel into knots. Dad sat heavily on the couch, the usual spark gone from his eyes. "Edward fainted at work today," Mom chucked out. "They sent him home, but for the past few weeks, he's been off, blacking out for a few seconds, losing track of time." My mind started racing. What did the doctor say? Was he in the hospital? "The doctor thinks we need to watch him. Figure out if something triggers it," Dad added, his voice low. He looked 10 years older. My move, the job, London, all of it just melted away. "Is he okay? Did the doctor say anything else?" I demanded. Apparently there were no clear answers. The doctor mentioned stress and potential neurological issues and ordered some tests, but mostly everyone seemed to be in the dark. And so, my parents said the words that sealed the deal. "We need you here. This family needs to stick together, now more than ever." My heart ached for my brother. The certain uncertainty of his health, a cold weight in my stomach, but there was also a flicker of resentment. The timing of all things. It felt so unfair. I'd finally carved out a sliver of independence, and just like that, it seemed to be whipped away. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. At that moment, I felt pulled into two impossible directions. On one side, London, shimmered with my hard-earned opportunity. On the other, Edward's uncertain health cast a long, heavy shadow. How do you choose between your future and your family? "I'll think about it," was the best I could manage. It felt weak, cowardly even. But what else could I say? I turned to Edward. He was sprawled on the couch, flickering through TV channels with a bored expression. "Hey," I said, my voice trying for casualness. "How are you feeling, buddy?" "Fine," he shrugged. "Just kinda tired. This whole thing is messing with my sleep, you know." Typical Edward, minimizing anything inconvenient. How long has this been going on, I pressed, my mind desperately trying to piece together some kind of explanation. The blackouts, did any specific thing seem to trigger them? He repeated the same vague stuff my parents had told me. Stress, lack of sleep, whatever. Something in the back of my mind screamed that this didn't add up. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was the tiny sliver of me screaming to hang on to that London dream. But doubt started to creep in, transforming into a cold, knotty fear. I needed more information. "Okay, but which hospital did you guys go to? Where are the doctor's reports? What tests did they order exactly?" My questions hung unanswered in the thick, tense air. Mom's tears started again, a steady stream dampening the worn dish towel. Dad just sighed, his shoulders slumping even further. Instead of concrete answers, I got more generalizations. "We're trying our best, Penny. Don't you trust us? Your brother needs you right now." My suspicion twisted into something sharper, a jagged edge cutting through the confusion. Was there truly something wrong with Edward? Or was this some elaborate, twisted ploy to keep me here? It sounded insane, even as the thought formed in my own head. But wouldn't my overprotective parents try anything, just to keep their daughter close? Anger sparked, fueled by frustration and my own nagging self-doubt. It would explain the vague answers, the convenient timing, and the way their sadness always seemed to ramp up the minute I talked about London. Was I a terrible person for thinking this? For doubting my own family? Guilt and shame washed over me, even as a cynical part of me clung to the suspicion. Had their love become so suffocating that they would resort to this? My mind couldn't rest. It was a whirlwind of guilt, anger, and a desperate need for concrete answers. To just sit idly in that house, surrounded by this confusing mix of worry and suspicion, felt impossible. I needed to confirm my fears, even as a part of me prayed I was wrong. The ethics of it all were a blur. I knew digging into my parents' phones felt horribly wrong, but at that point I was caught in a whirlwind of my own making. Desperation, tinged with a dash of self-righteous anger, propelled me. One shaky-handed snoop later, I had nothing. No suspicious texts, no doctor's appointments on the calendar, just the usual barrage of mom's daily affirmations and dad's reminders about lawn fertilizer. Time ticked away, each hour bringing me closer to my flight. It was a desperate move, checking Edward's room while he napped. I felt like a burglar in my own childhood home, rifling through drawers, searching for what exactly? A doctor's note? A hidden confession? That didn't happen. Edward's phone, carelessly discarded on his desk, lit up. Instinct took over me before guilt could catch up. One tap and I was scrolling through a group chat with his buddies. A flurry of texts about an upcoming weekend trip. The words, "Dude, you're a genius," "Free crash from the parents for Vegas," leaped out like a slap. My stomach turned. The details poured out, sickening clear. The faked fainting spells, the vague answers are designed to maximize parental panic. It was all there. A twisted plot, hatched with a casual cruelty only a younger sibling could manage, using his health, or lack thereof, to manipulate me into staying. I didn't confront him, didn't scream or shout. A strange numbness settled over me as I slipped the phone back. As night fell, I walked away from my parents' home, a quiet ghost exiting her own life. Back at my apartment, the one I was subletting, my friend hesitantly broke the silence. She'd already heard the fractured half-truths about Edward. When I poured out the rest, the betrayal, the manipulation, my parents' complicity, for I couldn't imagine they didn't know, her usually gentle face shifted from shock to a mother bear fury that mirrored my own. Everything was packed, ready to go, and for once, the thought of escape didn't bring guilt, only a fierce kind of determination. Leaving without a goodbye felt brutal, but I was done playing their game. Later, there might be apologies and explanations. Maybe then we would try to fix whatever this had broken between us. But right then, all I wanted was to get up on that plane and fly far, far away. I wasn't just leaving home anymore. I was breaking free, not just as someone's daughter trapped by a leash of worry and guilt, but as me, flawed, angry, heartbroken, but finally choosing my own path. The flight was turbulent, matching the storm raging inside me. My parents must have figured out the truth because my phone lit up like a Christmas tree with missed calls and enraged texts as soon as I landed. I ignored them, steeling myself for the inevitable showdown. By the time I settled into my tiny London flat, exhaustion and betrayal had me seeing red. Still, there was no way I could sleep, not when my phone pulsed with parental fury. I hit the call button, bracing myself. It was an onslaught, yelling about how I had abandoned them, how I could be so heartless, how they didn't raise me like this. The familiar guilt threatened to rise again, but I shoved it down. Then I let loose, spilled out the whole story. Edward's texts, my panicked investigation, the sickening feeling of having my closest family lied to my face. Their responses were a broken record of denial and accusation. They said I misunderstood, that I should have talked to them directly, and that they were worried sick about Edward and me. They circled around and around, their words losing whatever power they once held over me. It's a tricky thing, cutting the ties that bind you. At that moment, I couldn't even muster up the usual pang of guilt. My overriding feeling was disappointment, not so much in them, but in myself. Disappointment for not seeing their manipulation sooner, for letting their cuddling get this far. I felt like a fool. Now I'll be honest, there's a part of me that wonders, could it have been handled differently? Could I have confronted them first and given them a chance to explain? It's easy to say yes from a distance, cushioned by a new city and a chasm of emotions. But maybe they'd just have doubled down on their lies. Maybe tears and accusations would have won the day again. Do you guys think that I should have confronted them, or that walking away without saying goodbye was the right decision? Okay, update time. It's been a bit over a week since I dropped that whole bombshell, and let me tell you, the fallout has been intense. If you thought my parents were the masters of silent treatment before, well, you haven't seen anything yet. Turns out betrayal in their dictionary translate to call your daughter incessantly to detail every way she's destroyed your life. Honestly, they might have ruined the whole fresh start in a new city. Instead, I spend my time hiding from my phone. Every bus seemed to carry a fresh wave of mom's fears and dad's disappointed sighs. They'd cycle through every emotion: anger, barraging, guilt-tripping. It was like a masterclass in familial manipulation. A part of me felt terrible, but a bigger part just felt drained. My work hadn't even begun yet, and I was using these precious few days to explore, get hopelessly lost on the tube, and find the best fish and chips place within walking distance. Still ongoing research. Look, I know they're my parents. I know they love me. But in those early days, it felt like they loved the idea of me they'd constructed a lot more than the actual slightly messy wants to spread her wings me. Did they not understand that making me miserable wasn't exactly a compelling argument for me to rush back home? And there were a few awkward calls with Edward. He pulled the whole "I was just joking around, Penny, lighten up" routine, and then tried to play the sympathy card. Like, dude, own up to your own ridiculous scheme. I wasn't having any of it. The whole thing left me even more convinced that leaving when I did was absolutely the right choice. The Edward situation developed into a mess of denial. Just a silly prank, they insisted. You jump to conclusions like always, and of course, the classic, when you become a parent, you'll understand. Ugh, it was like arguing with a brick wall that also happened to be really good at guilt trips. Then the stakes were raised. My mom's health became a weapon in their arsenal. Dad began texting. Your mother hasn't been sleeping well ever since you left. She's so worried about you. Her blood pressure is through the roof. It was a transparent manipulation at its finest. And I wasn't falling for it again. Look, I'm not a monster. The thought of my mom genuinely not feeling well did make me a bit panicked. But the second those old patterns kicked in, the exaggerated worry, the unspoken demand, I rushed home to fix everything. A sense of cold clarity washed over me. Time for drastic measures. I hit the mute button. On calls, on texts, everything. It felt brutal, but oddly empowering. Silence was now my shield. The constant buzzing of parental anxiety couldn't reach me anymore. Honestly, the space has been, well, necessary. Like breathing for the first time without someone holding your nose. Without my phone lighting up with guilt trips every 20 minutes. I started experiencing London. Touristy stuff, sure, but also making friends at the cafe down the street. Figuring out how not to set my tiny kitchen on fire, and actually venturing outside the expat bubble. Of course, it's not a completely guilt-free zone. Sometimes I still find myself reaching out for the phone, ready to type out an apology, let's talk this out message. Then I remember the text from Edward, the feeling of betrayal, the constant pressure masquerading as love. I don't have all the answers. Maybe this rift will heal, maybe it won't, maybe someday I'll understand their overprotectiveness better. Though honestly, I hope my own future kids never have to find out what boundaries their mom will cross for them, no matter how well-intentioned. For now, my focus is on me, on building my own life, making my own mistakes, and maybe even getting a little bit lost along the way. My parents will always be part of my story, but for the first time ever, they're not the ones writing every chapter. Honestly, that feels like progress, even if it comes with a side of complicated emotions. Okay, buckle up folks, because things just took a turn for the absolutely crazy. Remember how I said my parents were good at guilt trips? Well, they just took it a whole new level. A transatlantic flight, a surprise visit kind of level. You won't believe it. I came home yesterday, a bit later than usual after exploring a new part of my neighborhood. Opened my apartment door, ready to crash and maybe try my hand at one of those fancy-looking British cooking shows. And there they were, Mom and Dad, sitting on my tiny sofa, luggage piled haphazardly by the door. Mom burst into tears the second she saw me. Dad gave me that disappointed but trying to be understanding look he's perfected over the years. Talk about an out-of-body experience. My mind went blank. It was like one of those sitcoms where the absurdity makes you short-circuit a bit. Hi? Was the best my stunned brain could come up with. Turns out, my eloquent silence was all the invitation they needed. Apparently, when I didn't respond to their increasingly frantic texts, they panicked. They booked tickets, reasoning that if I didn't talk to them on the phone, I couldn't avoid them in person. Can you believe it? They knew that I hid the key under the pod, so they just let themselves in. So here we were, I on my own sofa, feeling like a guest in my own life. Mom has already rearranged all my kitchen supplies. Not sure I needed alphabetical spices, but hey, Dad's clucking at the size of my TV screen. All the while, there's this constant undercurrent of, see how far we'd go for you? You should really come home. Part of me is touched, honestly. It's a messed up kind of love, but love nonetheless. The other part of me is screaming. I have work tomorrow, a job I fought so hard to get, a life I'm finally starting to build, and they've just barged in like it's their right. It's a weird kind of limbo. I want to yell, want to tell them to pack their bags and leave immediately, but I also see the exhaustion in their eyes, the desperation that fueled this insane plan. They're out of their element, adrift in this unfamiliar city, all because they can't let go. I honestly don't know what to do. I have work tomorrow, and I'm on my couch typing this right now. Any help would be appreciated. Hi everyone, I have some updates for you. So my parents actually talked to me and said they were sorry. After a day of awkwardness, they actually sat me down, like a real serious conversation. Mom apologized. Dad, bless his gruff heart, even managed to get out a choked up, "I'm sorry." Honestly, I think the most shocking part was hearing the words come out of their mouths. Turns out, those unanswered texts and calls I thought they were conveniently ignoring actually scared them. Like really scared them. They talked about sleepless nights, worst case scenarios, spiraling out of control. The kind of raw fear only a parent can understand. Apparently, my silence became this huge, terrifying unknown in their minds. It drove them to take that crazy leap across the ocean, a desperate bid for some kind of control. Then they said the magic words. "We would rather you be happy in London than not speaking to us." It felt like a weight lifted, even though a big knot of complicated emotions remained. There was relief, sure, but also a twinge of guilt for putting them through that. And let's be honest, a flicker of doubt. Was this real? Were they about to whip out a suitcase full of guilt trip supplies? But they didn't. The apology felt genuine. They admitted to overreacting, to letting their worries run wild, to not respecting my need for independence. We even had a surprisingly honest conversation about Edward. He was less than thrilled about his part in this being called out. There's still a lot to work out. I don't suddenly trust their motives completely, and healthy boundaries are going to need more than just one conversation to build. But for now, it feels like a truce. A ceasefire in the generational battle I've been fighting since I was old enough to have a curfew. Don't get me wrong, I love my family. They can be a lot to handle, but they're mine. And they love me enough to change. At least a little. Will there be more surprise visits? Probably. Will Mom try to send me a care package full of unnecessary sweaters? Definitely. But something shifted nonetheless. It's more than just them accepting my choices. It's about them finally starting to see me as more than just their daughter. A person with her own messy, independent life unfolding far from home. Maybe that's the biggest lesson here. It's about finding a balance, carving out a space for myself within the tangle of love and guilt that always ties me to them. London still feels like an exhilarating adventure, but maybe it's one that doesn't have to mean completely cutting the cord after all. And that was it for today's story. Thank you very much for listening. Smash that like button for me and subscribe for more stories. Thanks again, and we'll be seeing you in the next one.